Good, excellent. Well, thank you so much. The doors are closed. We're ready to go. Welcome also very much to our participants online. It's great to see this room filled to the very borders. Every single wall and chair is packed. And this is exactly the spirit of the World Water Week that COE arranges on an annual basis. It is really this spirit of meeting, joining forces to achieve change. So very warmly welcome, dear participants, minister, panelists, to this panel we're having today on governing the values and benefits of water. Let me maybe take this opportunity to really emphasize one of the very fundamental beliefs that we have at COE, which is that approaching water governance is absolutely critical to the entirety of the Sustainable Development Goals and to achieving Agenda 2030. Water is really central to achieving the SDGs, and there is a water component and a water dimension in every single Sustainable Development Goal. In 2022, if anything, has really been a wake-up call to this, with the droughts, the floodings, all of the unfortunate climate change consequences that we've been seeing in Europe, in other parts of the world. It's been a wake-up call on this centrality of water. And it is really abundantly clear that actions taken to improve water governance is really a prerequisite to be able to achieve a water secure world, or as we say at COE, a water wise world. But beyond words, what does this mean, a water wise word? Well, water governance is underlying and is critical and a critical entry point for successfully achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And many of the world's greatest challenges that we're seeing today are related to water. They are linked to water and water management. And an increasing number of countries and communities are really facing social, financial, environmental, developmental risks related to either too little, too much, or too polluted waters. And this is something that we need to increasingly acknowledge, embrace, and act upon. So we have gathered here today an eminent panel of key investors, of water decision makers, of practitioners, for hopefully a very interactive and inclusive debate, and also a learning session on the role of water governance in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So the aim of today's session, and I'm so happy to see so many of you join, is really to promote this learning among water investors and other decision makers and practitioners on advancing water governance solutions. So we're trying to leave a little bit behind the recognition of the challenges. There is a lot of talk around the challenges. Let's look forward and find common solutions and what it takes to actually address them. And that is why it's so important for us to gather indeed investors, practitioners, and other stakeholders to really have the whole range of what would it take to really change the situation. We're very much hoping for an interactive session also with you both online and in the room to reflect all of these different stakeholders' perspectives on the issues and also from different regions. Scenarios over the next 3 decades are abundantly clear in saying that water security, too much, too little, too polluted waters, will be increasingly challenging, but also increasingly critical to everything else. And the social and economic costs will be absolutely huge if we don't manage to reverse this trend of overexploitation of water, coastal or riverine flooding, land subsidence caused by groundwater abstraction, but also loss of ecological services and biodiversity. So this improved water governance that is at the core of CEWE's mission and mandate means that really countries can potentially, if managed well, really unlock the development potentials and the resilience to climate change impacts to achieve Agenda 2030 and its sustainable development goals. And water governance, or water management, as some prefer to call it, is really the common denominator in both the challenges that we see, but also in the solutions that are there for designing resilient systems that can adapt to, that can also incentivize and implement the much required measures towards achieving the SDGs. So the recognition that this water crisis that we hear so often is at the end of the day very much a governance crisis is something that we take at heart at CEWE and that we act upon. And that concept has gained considerable traction in water policies and strategies in both low-income countries, middle-income countries, but also high-income countries. And that is really what's interesting about this. It's the universality of this concept. So good water governance really contributes to securing reliable water availability and access of an acceptable quantity and quality of water for health, for livelihoods, for production, coupled with an acceptable level of water-related also risks. And good governance is absolutely required to ensure that public institutions and policy frameworks can enable and incentivize both public and private investments. And this is one of the aspects that we will look at in today's session. So what is CEWE's role in this? And why are we, beyond the fact that we are convening this session because it's part of World Water Week, what's our investment in this? Well, we actually take a very practical approach to work with governance of water. And we have developed a water governance framework, which is entitled Water Governance is a combination of functions performed with certain attributes to achieve one or more desired outcomes, all shaped by the values and aspirations of individuals and organizations. That comes from that framework as a sort of definition of water governance. And these core governance functions such as policy development, planning, regulation, decentralization, and coordination are really key processes that are part of this. And this framework really provides very practical guidance for and to decision makers and practitioners on designing these action-oriented water governance processes and ultimately improved water governance and demonstrating in practice and in real life how it can contribute to a better state of water resources and water services at the end of the day. And by tackling this through this process-oriented water governance framework, we feel that we can really contribute to meeting both current but also emerging development challenges. And CEWE also has a range of strategic interventions and measures as really means to enable and capacitate key water stakeholders to trigger those changes in behaviors, in prioritization, that are needed by really supporting these decision makers and water management practitioners by providing platforms for discussing and for developing these joint strategies and plans, but also by providing very concretely advisory services and support on policy development, regulation advice, and methods for improved governance of water resources and water services. Also by providing very much knowledge and research, and where we try to bring the at times perhaps more academic and technical water research to use for political level practitioners, hands-on decision makers, but also by providing capacity development and training of trainers in the field of water and water governance in particular. I think I might have forgotten to introduce myself. My name is Karen Gardes, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at SIWI. I apologize for that, but now you know who has been taking the floor for a while. And that actually was the trigger thinking of introducing myself, because I was about to introduce my colleague, Dr. Håkan Tropp, who will be moderating today's session and very much creating this interactive session. So Håkan, over to you.
I think it was well said on governance, and thanks for introducing yourself too, even though it came a little bit late. That's it. That's okay. That's okay. Yeah, I think, and we are really looking forward to an interesting debate on governance and related issues. And I think that touches very much on working with governance as a means to actually implement water policy around the world at different scales. I think it also very much underpins investments, de-risking investments, working with governance as one means on how to make investments more sustainable, for example. So we have lined up a very impressive set of presenters today from some different parts of the water sector. So we have some very strong representatives from governments, both from Africa, also Europe, and we also have from Japan, also from government, and we also have the latest from the research community on water governance. So we have a very impressive lineup. I'll be trying to moderate discussions, so we will be hearing a set of presentations, and then we go into more panel mode debate, and also where we will try to take as many questions as possible from the audience. So I think this room is really set up for a lot of interactions and how we can engage among ourselves. I think having said that, and I'm seeing the clock is ticking. I mean, 1.5 hours goes like this. So let's move on to the program here. And where I would like to introduce our actually second speaker, which is Honorable Mike Mposha, Minister of Water and Sanitation Development in Zambia. Please, the floor is yours. I think personally, I very much look forward to this presentation. For those of you who don't know, that Zambia has very recently embarked on a very impressive journey when it comes to water investments. So they very recently launched what is called the Zambia Water Investment Program, where they're aiming at leveraging some close to $6 billion over the coming years, also to create more than 2,000 jobs in the formal sector over the coming years. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Director of Ceremony. Dear participants, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Before I forget to introduce myself, I'm Mikey Mposha, Minister of Water Development and Sanitation, like you heard from Zambia, Southern Africa. I'm delighted to join you this morning to discuss various issues pertaining to governance, but also water-related issues. So I feel greatly honored to have been invited by the Swedish International Water Institute, SIWI, to join you as one of the keynote speakers and panelists during the session on governing the values and benefits of water. It's really a pleasure to be here, and we look forward to positive engagement. I therefore, from the outset, wish to commend SIWI and its partners for this great initiative. I also want to thank all of you for being here during this session, very important session, I must say, where, like I said, we will be discussing an important subject of governing the values and benefits of water. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as you are all already aware, all of us here are working in the context of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This is a plan of action aimed at achieving prosperity for planet Earth and all her peoples. The 2030 Agenda is centered on collaborative partnerships comprising the nations of the world and all stakeholders, putting their concerted efforts together to achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and the associated 169 targets. The successful attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, is expected to guarantee substantial progress of the world through balancing and integrating the three dimensions of sustainable development, namely economic, social, and environmental. Thus, the vision of the United Nations heads of state in adopting the Agenda 2030 was to, among other things, end poverty, hunger, diseases, fear, and violence, ensure universal access to quality education, health, and social protection, but also to guarantee the human right to safe drinking water, adequate sanitation, and good hygiene. The level of ambition expressed in the 17 SDGs of the Agenda 2030 by the United Nations, heads of state and government, cannot be attained without strong commitments to the tenets of good governance. This is especially the case for the attainment of SDG number 6, which is aimed at ensuring access to water and sanitation for all because of its cross-cutting nature. It is also important to observe that considerable progress on SDG number 6 will undoubtedly advance the attainment of most of the other SDGs, such as gender equality under SDG number 5, partnerships for the goals under SDG number 17, quality education under SDG number 4, zero poverty under SDG number 1, and ecosystems and biodiversity under SDG number 15. Other SDGs, which water and sanitation are critical to, include affordable and clean energy under SDG number 7, peace, justice, and strong institutions under SDG number 16, good health and well-being under SDG number 3, climate action under SDG number 13, and decent work and economic growth under SDG number 8. Ladies and gentlemen, the attainment of water security by respective governments and peoples cannot be guaranteed without laying a good, or indeed good foundations for the 4 pillars of water security, which comprise of transboundary cooperation, financing, peace and political stability, and good governance. Thus, good governance is one of the 4 key pillars required for the successful attainment of SDG number 6 and at least 10 other SDGs as already alluded to. In recognition of the critical importance of good governance for the attainment of sustainable development, the government of the Republic of Zambia emphasizes the embracing of the rule of law and the zero tolerance to corruption. This is aimed at ensuring that the existing legal and institutional frameworks operate effectively and efficiently as expected, and that where needed, the necessary changes to policies, laws, regulations, and institutional arrangements could be made. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me now share the Zambian case in terms of water governance. Firstly, it is my understanding that we are discussing governance in the manner in which power is exercised in the management of economic and social resources. In our case, it's the issue of water for sustainable human development. I'm borrowing this definition of governance from Cadbury Report of Governance of 1992. Based on this understanding, it may be helpful for me to share with you the general context of the governance in Zambia, upon which our experiences for the water sector is premised before delving into specific issues. So in order to enhance the tenets of good governance and accountability, the government of the Republic of Zambia has 3 arms of government. These are the executive, where the president is the head, and I'm currently privileged to serve as Minister of Water Development and Sanitation. The legislature, headed by the Speaker, and I must mention here that for the first time in the governance of our country since we got independence in 1964, we have a female speaker. So we are also embracing the issues of gender. Thank you very much. And indeed, the judiciary is headed by His Lord Justice, the Chief Justice. So the operations of these institutions is subjected to strong oversight arrangements, which are facilitated by the existence of a strong national audit institution, the Office of the Auditor General, and the committees of the legislature. Often, as a ministry, we have been audited and we have been made to appear before various committees of parliament on different aspects of water governance in order to provide the required clarity, assurances, and accountability. Let me also share with you that Zambia has been working towards the Vision 2030, where we aspire to be a middle-income country. Apart from the Vision 2030 document, Zambia has a national 5 years planning horizon where we have been developing and implementing our national plans towards achievement of our Vision 2030. It is therefore important to state that within these plans, there is always a broad service delivery area. We are currently implementing the 8th National Development Plan, where we have 4 broad service delivery areas. These are economic transformation and job creation, human and social development, environmental sustainability, including climate resilience, and good governance environment. In this regard, while the water sector directly contributes to economic transformation and job creation, as well as other two service delivery areas, the sector is expected to do so within the overall governance environment, not only as espoused in our constitution, but also as planned in our national plans. In terms of specific configurations, legal frameworks and institutional arrangements, the water and sanitation sector in Zambia is composed of two subsectors, namely the water supply, sanitation, hygiene or WASH subsector, and the water resources management and development subsector. The legal and institutional frameworks for the two subsectors are provided for in the Water Supply and Sanitation Act number 28 of 1997 and the Water Resources Management Act number 21 of 2011, respectively. Arising from these legal framework, the institutional arrangement on our water sector is such that we now have a ministry dedicated to matters of water and sanitation. I say this because in the past, the water component was under the Ministry of Local Government, just as a department. Later on, we evolved and then we were merged with Ministry of Energy, water, and other functions. So for the first time, realizing the importance of water and sanitation, the government decided to dedicate a ministry of water development and sanitation, and I happen to be the first minister of this ministry. We have under our ministry two regulators, namely the National Water and Sanitation Council and the Water Resources Management Authority, as well as 11 water utility companies dotted around our 10 provinces of our country. As a way of strengthening good corporate governance for our water institutions, NWASCO and WAMA, the two regulators, and all the 11 utility companies are governed by independent board of directors, which are not interfered with to ensure us achieving the tenets of good governance. Apart from the few minor issues which we continue to work on, our legal and institutional arrangements are anchored on international best practices for water governance. However, on the implementation side, there is still room for improvement, I must admit. For example, one of the biggest challenges we have is that we still have some of our citizens without adequate access to basic water and sanitation services, as we only cover about 71% of our citizens, while sanitation, thank you, while sanitation coverage stands at 54%. We are also still grappling with the issues of water pollution, high non-revenue water due to dilapidated water infrastructure and limited financing, encroachment of water bodies due to the increase in population and urbanization, among other challenges. Working with various partners, however, the government of the Republic of Zambia is resolved to addressing these challenges and ensuring that water resources management is effective and efficient within the tenets of good governance. Having highlighted the above challenges and in order to holistically deal with the water and sanitation challenges, His Excellency the President of the Republic of Zambia recently launched the Zambia Water Investment Program. The Director of Ceremonies alluded to that. This program was launched on the 16th of July this year on the margins of the African Union Mid-Year Coordination Meetings, which were recently held in Lusaka, Zambia. So Zambia Water Investment Program seeks to mobilize 5.75 billion United States dollars worth of water security and sanitation investment by the year 2030, around 3 investment forecasts, namely water investments to support economic transformation, enhancing resilience through water, and water and sanitation governance, and indeed institutional strengthening. So through the Zambia Water Investment Program, we hope to make good progress on the implementation of SDG number 6 and other related SDGs by, among other things, strengthening water governance and water sector institutions. So the Zambia Water Investment Program is premised on the continental program called Africa Water Investment Program, AIP, which was endorsed by the African Union, heads of state and government in 2021, and is an initiative of the African Council of Ministers on Water. So, and indeed other partners such as the African Union Commission. The African Union Development Agency, AUDA NEPAD as well, and the Global Water Partnership, to mention but a few. In this regard, the government of the Republic of Zambia would gladly work with all stakeholders to ensure a conducive enabling environment for the successful implementation of the Zambia Water Investment Program, which the water investment scorecard will be a key component. So we need to develop a water investment scorecard, which will be a very key component of our program. In the interest of time, ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude, I wish to, very important, invite all of you to Zambia. You may wish to know that apart from our focus on water governance, Zambia is one of the good holiday destinations as it hosts one of the 7 great wonders of the world, the Victoria Falls. So you are all invited to visit Zambia at your convenient time. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Minister. And I think you made a very excellent presentation on some of the governance challenges in Zambia. I think also very much talking about the importance of governance when it comes to working at different scales, from local up to transboundary, working cross sectors, not only with agriculture, energy, for example, but also cross sector when it comes to peace, cooperation, governance, and so forth. I also very much like how you ended here, saying that out of these roughly $6 billion that will be leveraged, some parts of that will go also for governance investments, which is very, very wise. I have no clue how much you will invest in governance. You know much better, but maybe this is also a question we can come back to, because I think it's also important to have a discussion on a little bit balancing different types of investments. We tend to think more in terms of infrastructure, for example, but there is a tendency globally to forget a little bit to invest more in sustainability of infrastructure investments, be it gray infrastructure or even green infrastructure, so to say. I can only attest to Zambia being a great location to be at. Musi Utunya, the smoke that thunders, that's the roaring Zambezi River that throws itself over the cliffs of the Victoria waterfalls. So that's really a great destination. So I'll be there, be sure. Yes, yes. Let me introduce, actually we have one speaker. It's David Lymer, who is the Deputy Head of Unit, Swedish International Development Corporation, SIDA. He called in sick this morning, unfortunately. So he was here to talk about how SIDA works on governance issues, how SIDA invests or intends to invest in some of these issues for the future. And of course, also where CV, we have a very close collaboration with SIDA. Karin, maybe you want to say just like half a minute on some examples of that collaboration, since it's a very strategic partner for us.
Indeed, indeed. Very sad that David Lymer could not be with us today, and I will try to say what we think and perhaps also hope David would have said about the strategic partnership with SIWI. Indeed, SIDA is, of course, a very strong partner of SIWI. Also because SIDA sees SIWI and values SIWI as a partner that can contribute to Sweden and the government of Sweden delivering on their strategy related to sustainable development and, of course, water and water governance. We have with SIDA several partnerships, I would say. We have one overarching strategic partnership, a kind of framework partnership that is really targeted to improve water governance. It's a multi-year partnership that we have with SIDA, focused on 4 pillars of activities that all relate and contribute to improved water governance. Pillar 1 being on a sustainable and improved management of shared water resources. So they can be shared transboundary, but they can also be shared at other levels between communities, between industries, between sectors. As long as resources and water resources are shared, they need to be governed and managed in an improved manner. The second pillar we work on with this framework agreement with SIDA is to create more resilient and sustainable water services and infrastructure. So very much related to the governance of the wash sector. The third pillar really boils down very much to aspects of governance such as participation and representation. So really looking at inclusion of all stakeholders and relevant stakeholders. Who sits at the drafting table for water strategies? Who sits at the decision-making table when decisions are made around water strategies and water programs? And here, SIWI, of course, as a very strong pusher for inclusion of women's perspective, youth perspective, indigenous people's perspective, is also a valued partner for SIDA in that. The fourth pillar we have in the framework agreement with SIDA is around knowledge development and innovation. So really trying to develop those tools, methodologies, and make them adapted, applicable, useful for the decision makers that work in this field. In addition to this framework agreement, we have a series of concrete projects and programs that are more either geographically targeted or thematically targeted, also with SIDA support. We have a program in Ethiopia. We have a program around source to sea, around landscape approach, around capacity development and capacity building. And also SIDA is a strong supporter of our shared waters partnership, which looks precisely at aspects of transboundary water cooperation. So these are some of the elements that I hope David would have mentioned in his presentation in demonstrating how SIWI is a useful partner to SIDA in implementing and delivering their strategies because of our nature as a global non-governmental entity that can also very much be this neutral and impartial partner in implementing improved water governance strategies.
Thanks a lot, Corinne. Actually, I'm going over from one Corinne to another Corinne. It's Corinne Roelofs. And she's the head of the water team for the Dutch Foreign Minister, Affairs of Foreign Ministry in the Netherlands. So please, the floor is yours. I should also say that we worked with the Dutch government for many years. We also know that the Dutch put very strong focus also on governance in different ways. And I think now also in your role as the co-chair for the next UN Water Conference that will come up in 2023. So there are some areas where we are working together, and I think this is also important for the whole water community, of course. So that's one example. So over to you.
Thank you. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. We've got a full house. We all know the challenges. Pressure on water is rising. Billions of people are exposed to too much water, too little, too polluted, and too unequal. Well-being and livelihoods of billions are at stake. Climate change and the degradation of nature further complicate things. So do population and economic growth, urbanization, shocks of COVID, and food price hikes. Judging from trends, our current systems to govern water, locally, nationally, and internationally, are not particularly effective. In the next decades, societies across the globe face major transitions in energy, in food, in ecosystems regeneration, and in infrastructure. And water is a factor, an enabler and a constraint in all of these transitions. The high-level panel on water signaled in 2018 that we need to understand, value, and manage water better, that we need more integrated approaches to water governance, a domain where siloed approaches are the rule. That is true, also in my world of donor programming. But siloed approaches do not work well in water governance, given the interdependencies across sectors. Water governance is every sector's concern, and thus far it isn't. Most policies and institutions that govern energy, urban, industry, or even agriculture still do not consider water as a constraint or a liability. Still, they mostly take water for granted. They have yet to adjust to the new normal of too little, too much, too polluted, or too unequal. Do we need governance innovations? Yes, we do. The upcoming UN 2023 Water Conference is an opportunity to advance such innovations at all possible levels. Most countries' water sector policies and strategies are quite okay, showing similarities across countries, but it is in policy implementation that differences manifest. If the scope of policy doesn't match national or local capacity to implement, good policies mean little. Implementation often falls short when it comes to devolving resources and capacity to the lowest possible level, enabling meaningful citizen participation, enforcing regulations, absorbing annual public investment budgets, and delivering services reliably and predictably. How many water sector ministries manage to actually spend their national budget allocations? Fewer than you might expect. Absorption capacity is low in the water sector, often more so than in other sectors. Why does water utility performance improve so slowly? Why is 40% non-revenue water not excessive? Why do billing and fee collection efficiencies go up so slowly? And why so much of government subsidy ends up supporting higher income instead of low income groups? Is it a matter of leadership, of incentives, of values, of capacity, or determination? Certain fundamentals in the water sector are not good. UN 2023 is an opportunity to get our collective act together. Let's zoom in on areas where we can make a difference. In agriculture, there's a lot to be gained, both in improving the policies that affect water and in implementing them. Few countries mitigate the adverse impact of irrigated agriculture and excess fertilizer use on water quantity and water quality. There is governance innovation potential in digital technologies that can monitor water use efficiency based on satellite data. These can support strategic water allocation and operational irrigation decisions to use water more sustainably. But that will only happen if the urgency to do so is felt across sectors, across ministries, across actors. And that requires leadership at the highest levels. The WAPOR program, open source, hosted at FAO, is an example of such innovative technology. It has been tested in Africa and the Middle East over the past years. It is potentially transformative. WAPOR will go global next year. Towards UN 2023, momentum and commitment could be built for its broader application. Now onwards to the corporate sector. That's also a major water user, but they have long kept a distance from water governance space, considering its government business. That is changing. They've become more aware of water risks they face and cause, and that they can manage to a large degree. Corporates have had their wake-up calls. Chip manufacturers in Taiwan, automakers in Southeast Asia, and river transport companies in Europe. Certain companies lead in mitigating these risks. The finance sector is coming up too, rewarding companies that do well and downgrading those who don't. The Serious Finance Task Force that represents a group of institutional investors with a cover of over $10 trillion of investments is one such initiative. Building on the work of the CEO Water Mandate, these institutional investors have articulated 6 expectations from every company they invest in and have developed toolkits to meet those expectations related to minimizing water footprint and water risk exposure, but also related to basic services for workers. The Thirst Foundation mobilizes companies to meet these 6 expectations. CDP is expanding its program to improve companies' disclosure on water. It would help if governments step in as well, enabling the industry transition from their end by enforcing relevant regulations, another piece of the puzzle. One way to look at transboundary water is that it is the governance level of last resort. Govern locally what can be governed locally, escalate to the national level what cannot be resolved locally, and address internationally whatever challenge exceeds the scale of national borders. Transboundary is controversial. In the face of global challenges and transitions, it is clear that national governance alone is not going to be enough. An upstream country that controls river flow to downstream countries may feel sovereign, the blue water perspective, but the same upstream country depends on green water rainfall over its territory that it has no control over. Land use changes in one country affect the rains in another. It shows that no country is truly sovereign when it comes to water. After all, the hydrological cycle has no real beginning and no real end. In that context, the notion of smart rather than absolute sovereignty is more constructive. The 2 UN Water Conventions can help operationalize the idea of smart sovereignty. UN 2023 may be the place to advance the transboundary governance debate. We have 6 months to go. Let us use those 6 months well in all of these governance domains and get our collaborative act together within and across sectors so that we can shift the governance needle at the UN 2023 Water Conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Corinne. I think indeed, again, it's a very strong message, I think, on working across sectors, working in multi-stakeholder processes, and which of course is very much required. I think in that vein, as they are setting up here with the PowerPoint presentation, sorry, we have some technical glitches. I'm not sure what it is, but in the vein of multi-stakeholder approaches and participation, just a little poll who's in the room. So who represents government here? hand up. Yeah, there are some government reps here for sure. What about private sector? We heard from Karin here, the role of private sector is very important as a user of water and also as a manager of water. What about multilateral organizations? We have down there. Yeah, great. Over there, some more. What about NGOs, research? A lot of hands there. Any farmer in the room? No farmers. Anyone working particularly with energy, for example? No. Okay. I think this is interesting. It's a little bit just to see who is in the room. So I think it's a fairly good mix. I mean, there are some we lack here, which we would like to have here for sure. Let's move on. So let's go over to Mr. Kyusuke Inada. And Kyusuke, he's the chief representative of JICA, that's the International Water Development Corporation of Japan. Please, the floor is yours.
So His Excellency and my friends at CIWI, and ladies and gentlemen, my name is Kyosuke Inada. I'm the Chief Representative of JICA Paris office. I cover partnership with our important European institutions. And today, I'm going to introduce you how we support the water supply system in developing countries and introduce one example from the Philippines on how we used our private sector investment instruments together with the technical cooperation instruments. And my apologies to our friends from Zambia. I wasn't aware that the minister was coming and I should have chosen example from Zambia. But it was only after I submitted the presentation that I knew. So happy to take any questions during the Q&A session if there is anything you want to hear about our activities in Zambia. So next slide, please. And I see not too many Asian people, so just an introduction of JICA. So we are a bilateral development aid agency, and we are quite sizable in that we support about $15 billion worth of ODA every year. And about 70 to 80% come in the form of sovereign loans and private sector investment. Next slide, please. So we tend to show that we're very big. So in the water sector, we are actually bigger than most other countries providing support to in developing countries. But I should put a little asterisk that all the 4 countries and institutions on the right-hand side, I mean the left-hand side, provide bilateral sovereign loans. So we can't compare easily with our friends in Netherlands and Sweden, but you can see that we are a sizable partner when it comes to water cooperation. Next slide, please. So having said that, so water sector is a major sector of intervention for JICA. So recently we have updated our 20 sector strategies, and water is certainly one of them. Next slide, please. In this strategy, which we call the global agenda, we have put a number of approaches in how we deliver our support in the water sector. And if you see the middle part of this presentation, we see the water sector, water supply sector, I should say, in this growth spiral. So in a lot of countries that we support, there's unfortunately what we call the vicious cycle. So you don't get too many water for too many customers, and we got leakages and non-revenue water, and which results in not very good management and financial situation in the country, and we get less investment. So at JICA, we have 2 entry points. One, as you see on the left-hand side, is that we use our private sector investment and sovereign loans and grantees to increase the investment together with our technical cooperation. But not only do we invest in the water supply system, but also we focus on how to increase the revenues for the authorities such as in Zambia so that they can self-sustain the system to put this spiral in a virtuous manner rather than a vicious cycle that we often see, unfortunately, in developing countries. Next slide, please. So this is the example from the Philippines, which I should have used the example from Zambia. But in the Philippines case, we partnered with the private sector in Japan, and they approached us and said they want to invest in what they call the Manila Water Holding Company, which provides water supply to the western part of Manila. So we funded the feasibility study. And after they found out that, well, they could do the water service expansion with some investment from the commercial banks in Japan, but they found that the non-revenue water portion was quite problematic. So we used our private sector investment to fund those parts and also sent a lot of experts to make sure that this company gets enough technical advice to maintain these pipelines and know how to generate the revenues themselves so that the system itself will be sustainable. So this is a very, one of the many examples we have on the ground. But the point I want to stress here is that it's not the investment, it's not the technical operation that is very important. It's the cycle of growth of the water supply system itself that is very important, which we think is the most important issue when it comes to the governance of water supply. Next slide, please. So in a nutshell, what I want to tell you is that first, rather than we focus on investing in a certain facility or we send certain experts, our focus should be on how to help our friends in developing countries turn the vicious cycle of water supply growth into a virtuous one. And also secondly, when we do that, we don't focus on our instrument itself, but to make sure we have all the instruments ready for our friends in developing countries and structure the right combination. So in the case of Lusaka, where in the 1990s and the early part of 2000, they weren't ready for private sector investment. So we went to our grant aid for developing the underground water and also the water supply system, which I am told from my colleagues that it's been maintained quite properly and still in use. And last but not least, these type of knowledge sharing sessions is very important for us to be on top of what others are doing and to make sure that the best knowledge is going to be utilized for any intervention by a private sector or an NPO or a bilateral institution like us. So that is it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Idada. I have to say, I really like this concept of a virtuous cycle growth. That sounds very constructive. And of course, there are lots of things that needs to happen to make that cycle virtuous and not vicious, which can happen, of course, too, as we know. I think with that, I would like to introduce Gianpel Delangelo. So he's with a research program called New Wave. So that's the next generation of water governance students, decision makers. So we really look forward to hear from the latest from research. Please, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Hakan. Thank you for the kind invitation to see. Do you hear me? Is it working? And hi, everyone. So my name is Gianpel Delangelo. I'm an associate professor of water governance and politics at the Vrije Universiteit of Amsterdam. And I'm leading the next water governance network. I'm very happy to be part of this such a distinguished panel. So I would like to start with a provocation and cite Erik Swingedo, who's one of my favorite political geographers, dedicated most of his life to study water issues. And once he actually was invited to speak to our New Wave PhD students and started his talk saying, I actually can't care less about water. I study water issues because they are the most fluid way to address social, environmental, and economic injustice. So departing from this provocation, I would like to raise the question, how are we going to train the next water governance leaders? How are we going to push forward a research agenda that takes on this type of socio-environmental and political complexity. So I'm taking the opportunity to speak about the New Wave Training Network, which is a network funded by the European Commission, which is gonna go on until 2024. It's part of the Marie Curie actions. Next. And we have a very interesting combination of partners and host organizations from different parts of the world, from all sectors. So the academic, international organizations, NGO, and the private sector as well. Next. So these are our host institutions. As you see, a number of leading research universities working on water governance and water issues. Next, and this is our larger partner organizations, and you can see some of the usual suspects that are participating to our network. Thank you. So the objective, the goals of New Wave are to bring together an excellent transnational and transdisciplinary network of water governance organizations and develop and implement a cutting-edge actionable research agenda. So the actionable part is also particularly important. All of this through a training program. So we are the first doctoral PhD program that has been coherently launched in Europe on water governance issues. So far, we did hire 15 early stage researchers, 15 PhD candidates. Good news is that the large majority of these candidates are actually women. And we have launched in the last couple of years a number of training activities. I would be very happy to share more information later on. And so we are here to respond to what we consider an urgent socio-environmental necessity, which of course calls for policy action. But we're also here working on the research frontiers. So water governance is actually an academic field that is happening and is developing as we speak. There is a lot of theoretical conceptualization and epistemological conceptualization that needs to be pushed forward. And by engaging with water governance, we are actually challenging the monodisciplinary and technical type of approaches that have characterized water management so far. So we do want to challenge the current water governance policy status. We are here in the room to provoke. And we depart, sorry, this slide is way too dense with information, but we depart from the identification and the diagnosis of the fact that in science and practice at the science policy interface, there are a number of shortcomings, and the New Wave Network tries to address those. So fundamentally, there is a lack of a rigorous interdisciplinary evaluation of water governance approaches, both ex ante and ex post. Are we evaluating the type of water governance innovations that very often are being put in a technical top-bottom way? And which type of criteria are we using? Is there participation in those criteria? Which voices are being taken into account? And this speaks to the aspect of limited reflexivity. We believe that the water governance sector, apart from a minority of critical scholars, has very much been influenced by hegemonic political agendas, neoliberalism as one to reflect. So power dynamics are clearly something that should be scrutinized when we're discussing water governance issues. And do we have actually a systemic understanding of the functioning of the global water governance system? I actually believe we don't. There is so much related to the ideational dynamics that, for example, we don't consider. Why are certain paradigms, why are certain ideas stronger than others? Who gives authority to those type of ideas? And what is the genealogy of those type of ideas? And there is actually no systematic study of the diffusion of certain type of water governance patterns. You will certainly recognize the fact that in the global water governance agenda, there are certain type of patterns that recur and that often come back. But have these been mapped? Have they been studied in a systematic way? And then we also need to be aware of the fact that if we're dealing with water governance, we shouldn't forget the biophysical component. And this brings up the very tough interdisciplinary challenge of bringing together natural science and social science, which fundamentally very often encounter epistemological clashes. So how to train the next water governance leaders is also a question of method. What type of methods? So there is a scientific challenge there. And of course, what we believe is that there is a dearth of collaboration between critical academic communities and the natural scientists. They speak different languages. Epistemologically, it will be difficult to put in the same room scientists that have been trained with the positivist method with the critical social scientists that are questioning how science is even being conducted. So our ambition is to try to speak to those type of limitations. So these are our champions, 15 PhD students working on different case studies. They are already in their second year. And as you see, next please. They are conducting case studies all over the world in several different countries. Next. On a variety of different themes. So this is also the other challenge of water governance. And imagine how to create a coherent doctoral program around the issues that go from all the way from water and migration to urban water governance, to water and mining, to recommoning, and to transboundary water nexus. You can find all of this information on our website. Next. But there is another aspect that is very fundamental. We are working on both an inductive and deductive process. So we have a focus on individual case studies, but our greatest ambition is to address in a systematic way global patterns. And to do that, we're bringing in a coherent approach that looks at problematics, paradigms, and patterns of water governance. So this is a heuristic framework which is aimed at bringing up in a systematic way, so through systematic, rigorous methodological research activities, some of these emerging common denominators. Next. And so some of the aspects that we believe are important to bring in the water governance debate and in the training around water governance, and that we have been working on since we were launched, is the idea of expanding our epistemological horizons across these disciplinary boundaries, being serious about co-production of teaching and learning activities. There is so much knowledge that comes from indigenous communities, social movements, practitioners. We really are trying to make an effort to step out of the ivory tower. And so the involvement of non-academic actors is fundamental. Leveraging participation of civil society, grassroots initiatives, and top-down approaches. And lastly, our methodological research approach that combines in-depth case study in different parts of the world with a global systematic approach to those type of issues. And with this, I can end my presentation. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Jean-Paul. Really great. I think this really puts the finger on, well, how do we work in the interface between research and practice? So it's how we basically transfer the knowledge on water governance to more practical issues linked to water reform in countries. And I think particularly implementation. Let's get all the speakers up here to the front. And let's take some questions from the audience here. I think you've been all too patient here in the room, I think. So we've been babbling along here from the front. We only do have one microphone. Honorable Minister, yeah, please join us here. We have only one microphone, so we have to pass it on very quickly between us. So we'll do our best. Shoot away. Who would like to start? Yeah, I think it was the gentleman behind you.
name is Gokul Sampath. I'm a PhD candidate at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in urban planning, and I study the distributive politics of water generally and water governance. My question is about water governance and ideas of water governance in general. There's been a lot of academic evidence over the last 20 years that communities in particular at the local level and in rural areas can successfully manage water resources without the help of external agents like governments, even markets, or civil society and institutions. This is a pretty bold claim, so I was wondering what you guys thought about it, and what should be the appropriate role for communities? Should they be at the center? What should be the appropriate role of government in water governance at the local level?
Thank you. My name is Julie Wechter. I work with Dig Deep, a nonprofit organization providing water to the 2.2 million Americans who don't have running water. And my question is how NGOs can support governments in water access. Oftentimes NGOs may step in and overstep the role of government, but recognizing that it is ultimately the government's responsibility, how can nonprofit organizations support governments in that role?
Let's take the third one. I think you were the first there, and then we come to you, Manfred. Don't worry.
Thank you very much. My name is Daniel Mazzelli. I work at the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. I would like to link today's session with yesterday's one on groundwater as hidden treasures. It was stated that we need profound changes, actually transformation, in particular also of our economic systems worldwide. Else we will not get out of the problem. So I was a bit concerned hearing about the virtuous cycle of growth. I really doubt whether growth is the right way of transforming the societies to really become sustainable. Thank you very much. I would like to have a reaction by the other panelists maybe on that.
Ooh, that's a big one. Ooh. How many minutes do we have? Yeah, 15 minutes. Okay, let's take here. I mean, we heard about the role of community-based work and very much local governance and the role of community-based organizations. I think that can also tie into the role of NGOs and how civil society can contribute. I think also linked to that, what can governments do to enable, be it community-based organizations, other types of NGOs, and of course also the big one, whoever would like to have a jump on that one. So who would like to start? I mean, feel free to respond to maybe one question and we'll take turns. So who would like to start? Corinne? Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think everywhere in the world, we are realizing that locally led is becoming more and more important, and that a lot of the aid doesn't even reach the people at local levels. So we see that there is a movement that the management, but also the power has to devolve to be devolved to lower levels. At the moment, of course, adaptation is very much an important theme in the water sector. And we're looking from the Netherlands, we're looking at the way we can set up a program, a large program that is really focusing on locally led adaptation. And it requires a lot of change because our management and financing requirements are very, very tough. And this would mean that you also actually give local communities more say in spending the budgets. So it will really involve a lot, but I think there's also a clearer awareness that this is really necessary. This is really what needs to happen.
I I was thinking there, is this something you do research on, or some of your colleagues, and some insights you can share?
Well, thank you, Coco Sampat. Well, I think you're touching the core of the work of Elinor Ostrom here for 40 years. She and the entire community that developed around her really asked this question: what is the role of communities in water governance? In her Nobel Award-winning Governing the Commons, actually, community irrigation schemes were the case study. So, as you know, water is highly rival and difficult to exclude, which makes it a common pool resource. But then the question is, what type of governance arrangements exist? And I think that the key here is to move beyond the Latin jurisprudence of the formal type of governance arrangements. There is a variety of hybrid modes of governance. And this is where we need to work. We need to work in, and I don't want to, just say something warm and comforting, because all of this will happen through conflict and contestation. But there is no other way than creating, perhaps in a conflictual way, cooperative and synergistic arrangements between different type of actors on multiple levels. So in my opinion, the role of communities is fundamental. And of course, what we can do in this type of spaces is to, really bring these type of voices on board. And NGOs, Julie, I think it's absolutely the role there. And very often they are the organizations that are moderating this type of discussions. What is, I think, important to keep in mind is that there is never a dynamic that is either fully cooperative or fully conflictual. It's always interdependent and dynamic circle between competition, cooperation, and conflict, and often very conflictual type of situations they bring to very highly cooperative type of arrangements. But then, of course, it's not stable. So it's a dynamic aspect. And what I want to also to point at is that we are living in a world of very fast socio-environmental change. So hydrological, hydroclimatic change is very fast. And in order to tackle this, not only there is a need for transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary research, there is a need for actually people, and therefore the role of citizen science, to be there and to be able to monitor and bring on the table those type of very fast changes that are happening nowadays.
Thank you so much, Appel. Minister, let's hear from you. I think there are some issues being tossed around. I think it would be, and this is something we try to work on, and of course many others too, to work more on innovation linked to governance, working with developing different types of systems, different types of tools on how one can work with governance. And I think now in relation to the investment program that you're embarking on, how would that sit in when it comes to supporting local communities? I also think, how do you see the role of the Zambian government in enabling and supporting local community?
Thank you. Let me start by also thanking my two colleagues who responded and laid a very strong foundation in responding to the other two questions. So I'll just combine first on the issues of communities, managing water resources, but also on how NGOs can support government. You see, in the recent past, until in the recent past, water was just water, probably because we had enough water. But like my colleague has said, things are changing very fast. What used to be plenty in terms of water supply cannot be said to be the same now. So in view of the new challenges that have come on board as a result of the effects of climate change, it is important that communities, particularly in rural areas, are brought on board to understand that water is not just water. Water is no longer in abundance like it was in the past before the threats of climate change. Therefore, utilize water in such a way that the person or the community next door still has an opportunity to use this water. So we cannot completely ignore issues of water regulations when it comes to communities, because water bodies are being affected. I think I noted in your presentation, you'll find that what is happening elsewhere in terms of utilization of water affects the other people downstream. Issues of pollution, you'll find that farming activities on the water banks upstream will end up affecting other people downstream. So it's important that rural communities, communities in general, are brought to speed in terms of regulations to manage water resources. That is very important. And then it brings again the NGOs assist. I think we need NGOs more than before now, because they need to carry the message, not only in urban areas, not only in peri-urban areas, but more importantly in rural areas, to understand what has brought about the threats, what has brought, talking about, I think JICA talked about issues of underground water. In the past, would do abstract water using boreholes at 20, 25 meters. Now we are having many communities crying. They're going to drill up to 180 meters deep without finding water. They're hitting dry boreholes. So what does this speak to? It speaks to the fact that the effects of climate change are real. And now we need NGOs to come on board than before, very aggressively, to send the message across that what is happening is as a result of the threats of climate change, but also to, to bring to speed the communities in rural areas in terms of increased demand for water for various use, so that we cannot be at the same level in terms of understanding these water issues from the urban setup and the rural areas, but to kind of bring them closer to the level of the understanding of the people in the urban areas. And I think that the missing information can be provided by NGOs. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister. Mr. Nara, we had one question lingering still here in the air. It was the one on the virtuous cycle of growth. And since you mentioned it and I highlighted it, and as something I see is important, and I think the kind of the key word there was really like the virtuous cycle. So, but please, if you could explain that a bit more for us. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much for the question, and it's a good opportunity for us to present our strategy in a session like here and get feedbacks from all the water experts around the world. And JICA and development agencies are very funny organizations, because we do our business not to prosper ourselves, but to make ourselves go out of business as soon as possible. So it's a little difficult for us to step up to our clients in developing countries, including Zambia, of course, to say that, well, you need a lot of water for those who haven't been able to access, as part of their basic human rights. So most of our client country governments and our stakeholders say that they want to grow, and that includes water sector or any other sectors. They want to, reach out to become a middle-income country by a certain period, or they want to expand the supply of water or any other important economic or social services to the people living there. So it's maybe the term growth wasn't, very easy to understand, or a bit not very common in the water sector strategy. But the philosophy behind this is that so we want to help our developing countries do things on their own, just as the first gentleman pointed out. So whether it's a rural urban area, I think the emphasis should be that in any country, that particular country should be able to generate the necessary revenues to invest in the infrastructure or any other facilities or services that they are looking to provide services to the people. So again, maybe you and I disagree, but our point was that, well, how can we assist client countries to be able to generate enough revenues so that they can keep on investing to expand their services, in this case, water, to their fellow countrymen. In the water sector, we see that non-revenue water, which usually stems from the leakage from the very poor situation pipelines, and also their inability to collect the revenue which the clients may wish to pay for, but unable to collect due to technological or management issues. So how can we assist them in self-sustaining those necessary revenues so that they can stand up on their feet? So so that was the philosophy behind the strategy or the approach that I explained. And it could be different from country to country. In the case of the Philippines, the private sector investment had a room to come in and provide the necessary investment. But maybe in Zambia and rural areas, maybe that's different. But I think the point here is that we need to make sure to find a way for our clients to stand up on their feet and make sure that our external support isn't necessary, or it only lasts in a very short term. So I hope that was partly answering some of the questions you raised. But thank you again for your good comments, and I will certainly inform that to our headquarters. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that reply. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, so I mean there will be no more room for questions, but we will for sure stay in the room. So we'll be here and staying on. So come up and discuss with us on these issues. There are also many CV colleagues here in the room, so I'm sure they're also interested to stay on a little bit. I think before we leave the room, I would like to give the panel just like a last word, if you want to, like one sentence, what you would see as let's say the next what governance priority you see within the next 2 to 3 years, for example. So like in one sentence, if possible. Jean-Paul, I'm putting you on the spot here.
I think that, the key challenge, in my opinion, is the transdisciplinary scientific challenge. So how
I think the key is that water governance will enable the big transitions that we are facing.
Most importantly, issues to do with transboundary cooperation will need to be heightened, but with your permission, I think you had raised another very important, if I get okay, fine. I mentioned about our coverage being at 71% in terms of water supply, sanitation being around 54%, so quite low before 2030, but also high non-revenue water accounting for 50 to 51%. So under the Zambia Water Investment Program, we hope that given the support under PPPs and the other assistance, we should be able to close in the gaps. Thank you.
Okay. So maybe locally affordable digital technologies.
Super. A big hand to the panel. Thank you so much. Excellent. I would also like to thank Isabel, who has been also one of the brains behind and been taking care of a lot of their work. Also Stefan. Great. Let's keep the debates, discussions going. It's only the start of the week, so let's continue to debate and discuss governance. So we really look forward to that. I and some of my colleagues will stay on a bit. So if you want to discuss more, we'll be here in the room and just outside. Thank you so much.